A lot of people have contacted me with a request to create a guide on the Great Pyramid. I have been reluctant to do so, as the structure has frankly been done to death, and I would rather highlight the lesser-known Egyptian structures. Like the young King Tutankhamun, the number of publications on the Great Pyramid is especially numerous and would take some years of one's life if one attempted to read them all. I wouldn't say that it was my favorite structure in Egypt, but for many people, it's like moths to a flame. If any structure requires a government health warning, it surely belongs to the above structure. It has obsessed many people, as it has the properties of a black hole. Once it catches you in its gravity, it is very difficult to escape. The numerous books on the structure are matched by the numerous theories to explain its existence. For Egyptology, it is the tomb of the pharaoh Khufu, Greek variant Kheops, whilst for others, it is a water pump, a power plant, a prophetic device, a geodetic marker, which encodes the dimensions of the Earth, etc. The list could go on. There can be little doubt that it is the most multi-role building in existence if we accept all the theories assigned to it. Why this should be is a mystery in itself. It's not as if the structure stands alone, but for some reason the other giant pyramids seem to get a pass. One can only assume their mass is not sufficient to generate the black hole effect. Positions are clearly polarized between theorists, but generally, those theorists that fall outside the narrative of Egyptology are often referred to as pyramidiates. Mark Lehner, for example, would describe the early explorer Piazzi Smyth as a pyramidiate. It is a somewhat unfortunate term, as it has the effect of discouraging people from reading the works of people so labeled. Whilst I do not subscribe to the theories of Piazzi Smyth and pyramidologists such as the Edgars, they are to be commended for some of the clearance work, data collection, and early photography of the Great Pyramid. Indeed, one would wish that Egyptologists were as obsessed on the structure as alternative theorists, as then we might have better data to work from. Certainly, the Great Pyramid has been more thoroughly explored than any other pyramid. However, for the most part, the available data largely comes from old sources and often from outside Egyptology, and there are too many blank spaces that need to be filled in. There is no hefty book one can purchase that explains every aspect of the pyramid in detail and help fill in these blank spaces. Instead, Egyptology too often churns out what I often describe as coffee table books. These books, whilst often well-produced, with fine images, are too often just a compendium of pyramids, where a few pages is given to describe each pyramid. There remain too many voids in our knowledge of the Great Pyramid, and that's not including the voids picked up by the Scan Pyramids project. And in many ways the data which we hold is not unlike the sorry state which I have already described in Snefru's giant pyramids. Whilst Egyptology has made great strides in practically every aspect of ancient Egyptian life, it appears that when it comes to architecture, the discipline has largely vacated the subject. This lack of interest has left voids too easily filled by alternative theorists, and likely this alternative interest has entrenched Egyptologists' position and reluctance to thoroughly examine these massive feats of engineering. Given the huge amount of published information on the structure, and to keep this guide to a manageable size, it is not possible to comment on all the various authors and theories, and so I will endeavor to concentrate more on the structure itself. Though we have snippets of information from classical sources, such as Herodotus, Strabo, etc., caution is always required on using such old sources. A clearer picture of the structure could be said to start from the arrival of Professor John Greaves, who would explore the structure during his tour of the Middle East from 1637 to 1640. His findings of the pyramids were published in his Pyramidographia in 1646. The above drawing comes from his publication and highlights what was known at that time. In common with many other early explorers, the subterranean parts of the pyramid were an unknown, as the descending entrance passage and well shaft were blocked with debris. Greaves' work is probably one of the first scientific attempts to record the structure. Further degradation of the structure has occurred since his time, for Greaves tells us that he and two friends climbed the pyramid to count the steps. Two would record 207 steps, whilst one recorded 208. Today the number of steps is closer to 203. Petrie would appear to record remnants of 203 steps. The French consul general for Egypt, 1692 to 1738, Maillet, would further improve our knowledge of the structure, as would the French savants attached to Napoleon's Egypt expedition of 1798. The mystery of the subterranean parts of the pyramid would finally be resolved by Caviglia in 1817, who would finally clear the debris blocking up the descending passage and discover the unfinished subterranean chamber, along with the end of the mysterious well shaft, which connected to the descending passage. The next major milestone in exploration of the pyramid came courtesy of Howard Vyse in 1835 during his tour of the Middle East. Initially, he employed Caviglia, but the two men quickly fell out, and Caviglia was removed from his operations. Vyse would employ the engineer John Perring, who would provide the best drawings and measurements then available. From the same publication, we have Perring's cross-section of the pyramid. This would differ from earlier depictions, as it shows the 5 so-called relieving chambers above the king's chamber, along with the narrow shafts which connect to the outside of the pyramid. The lowest of these chambers had been entered by Nathaniel Davison in 1765. Vyse, with the help of gunpowder, would discover the remaining 4 chambers. The 4 chambers which Vyse blasted into would have been fairly well sealed and protected spaces, untouched since the construction of the pyramid. In these chambers, numerous workers' markings and graffiti were found, including the names of Khufu. These discoveries of Vyse are a major blow to some theorists who ascribe the structure to some lost civilization, and so the story is told that Vyse forged Khufu's name. This forgery theory still has many supporters today. Indeed, it even made the plotline for the Stargate movie in 1994. For my own part, I have no problems with the graffiti and workers' marks that Vyse found, and am more than satisfied that they are genuine. Some may argue that the lowest chamber, Davison's chamber, was devoid of any markings or graffiti, though I would point out that this chamber was left open by an ancient tunnel to the top of the Grand Gallery, and that when Davison entered, it contained over a foot of bat dung. This chamber could have been a roosting spot for bats for centuries, so would it be a surprise that no markings survive here in such an environment? The next person of note to explore the pyramid was the Astronomer Royal for Scotland, Charles Piazzi Smyth, who along with his wife ventured to the pyramid in 1865. In part to prove the theories of John Taylor, who died in 1864, Taylor had published a controversial book entitled The Great Pyramid, Why Was It Built and Who Built It, in 1859. Before Piazzi Smyth left for Egypt, he would publish a book entitled Our Inheritance in the Great Pyramid in 1864. This book would subsequently go through many editions, each bulkier than the previous. The contents of the book still have their supporters today, though it would ultimately gain him the title of Pyramidiot from other quarters. Today, Piazzi Smyth is largely airbrushed from discussions on the pyramid, though there is much useful data to be found in his 3-volume publication, Life and Work at the Great Pyramid during the months of January, February, March, and April. AD 1865, published in 1867. Piazzi Smyth's work received mixed reviews, especially in an era which was still largely coming to terms with Darwin's book published in 1859, The Origin of Species. One of the avid supporters of Piazzi Smyth was the father of Flinders Petrie, and indeed the young Flinders Petrie took quite an interest in Piazzi Smyth's work. In 1874, at the age of 21, Petrie would publish his first book, Cosmic and Metric Systems in the Great Pyramid. This publication by Petrie is largely airbrushed from his bibliography due to its content, though his subsequent publications, Inductive Metrology 1877 and Stonehenge 1880, are not so controversial. By 1877, disagreements between the Petries and Piazzi Smyth emerged. This would ultimately lead to the Petries' decision to travel to Egypt and use their surveying skills to obtain superior measurements of the pyramid. In the event, only the younger Flinders Petrie would travel to Egypt with his instruments in 1880. In some ways, Petrie was the ideal candidate to survey the pyramid. His in-depth knowledge of the myriad theories which surrounded the pyramid could be readily put to the test by his fine surveying skills. He would spend 2 winter seasons in Egypt and publish his findings in the Pyramids and Temples of Giza in 1883. This publication would become the gold standard on the Great Pyramid, and still very much a primary resource today. Petrie's work would severely damage the theories of Taylor and Piazzi Smyth, with Piazzi Smyth quick to rebut Petrie's findings in 1884 when he published new measures of the Great Pyramid by a new measurer, described and tested by Piazzi Smyth. Petrie's experience in Egypt would eventually lead him to be one of the founding fathers of Egyptology. Petrie would comment on how his work affected pyramid theories, he states. As to the results of the whole investigation, perhaps many theorists will agree with an American who was a warm believer in pyramid theories when he came to Gizeh. I had the pleasure of his company there for a couple of days, and at our last meal together he said to me in saddened tone, "Well, sir, I feel as if I had been to a funeral. By all means let the old theories have a decent burial, though we should take care that in our haste none of the wounded ones are buried alive." Petrie's work in some ways was the last major investigation on the pyramid. In the following century, pyramidologists such as the Edgars and others would carry on exploring the structure, though today such theorists would be described as pyramidiates. It was a strange era when Egyptology were content to allow such theorists to do major works and investigation inside the structure. In the 1960s, the Italian scholars Maragioglio and Rinaldi set aside a whole volume of their work on the Great Pyramid, and this work along with Petrie's is mostly quoted from Egyptologists today. Today, access to the pyramid is tightly controlled, and exploration is largely by reading the above reports. Modern technology has slowly arrived at the structure, with the most recent being the Scam Pyramids project. However, much like the Scam Pyramids images, our picture of the pyramid is quite fuzzy, and it is a very frustrating structure to investigate due to the lack of clear data. More modern forensic investigation of the structure is long overdue. The above brief history of exploration is mostly what scholars have to work from, and one of the first to try make sense out of the design of the pyramid was the German Egyptologist Ludwig Borchardt, 1863 to 1938. He was of the view that the design of the structure was an ad hoc affair. Basically, the original intention was for the king to be buried in the subterranean chamber, but that a change of plan resulted in this being abandoned for a new chamber inside this superstructure of the pyramid, in the form of this so-called Queen's Chamber. This in turn would give way to a new chamber in the form of the King's Chamber. This somewhat chaotic sequence of events still has its supporters today, whilst for others, they see the design as a well-planned, unified design from the outset. For example, MNR would state, "All the above-mentioned elements lead us to conclude that the hypothesis of Borchardt regarding the three projects for the funerary apartments of Kheops is not acceptable. According to us, all the rooms and passages built in the Great Pyramid belong to a sole project which was studied in every detail as a whole." This sentiment appears to be shared by Zahi Hawass and Mark Lehner, who state, Rainer Stadelmann, however, documented a long tradition, found before and after Khufu, of a standard model of three chambers in Old Kingdom pyramids, and so other Egyptologists see the whole inner arrangement as a unified design, planned from the outset, and we agree. In fact, some evidence suggests that the subterranean chamber, which Khufu's workers left unfinished, was the last of the three to be created. Having reviewed the available data, I would tend to agree that the Great Pyramid was built to a unified plan and that the unfinished subterranean chamber was created last. Ultimately, it is up to the reader to do their own diligence on the available data, which unfortunately is not as good as it could be. We will now look at the individual components of the pyramid in greater detail. I would like to thank the many people who have assisted in providing images for this guide. Suffice to say, any suggestions that I might make on the structure is not necessarily shared. In the above image, we are looking at the southeast corner of the Great Pyramid. To the extreme left, we can see part of the old boathouse which used to house Khufu's boat, and in the foreground, the reconstructed entrance leading into Pyramid GID. Today, most of the debris has been removed from around the pyramid, likewise around Khufu's pyramid, though unfortunately the debris surrounding Menkaur's pyramid is yet to be cleared and is in much the same state that the early explorers found it. This massive pile of debris which flanked the pyramid was a major obstacle in determining the size of the structure. The French savants had uncovered the two northern corner sockets of the pyramid, and an attempt was made to measure their distance. Suffice to say, distances varied significantly depending on who did the surveying. For pyramidologists, the theoretical length should be 9,140 inches. This was determined with a measuring rod of about 25 inches being used to mark out the base of the pyramid, and that the number of days in the year times this rod would give the length of the year. 365.2422 times 25.025 is equal to 9,140 inches. In the above image taken by Piazzi Smyth in 1865, we can better see the debris-covered landscape of the Giza plateau. The Sphinx is visible middle right, whilst the large hole on the south face of the pyramid is courtesy of Howard Vyse. Piazzi Smyth was not equipped to excavate the mountains of debris at the base of the pyramid, but by fortunate event, on his last week at Giza, he was introduced to Mr. Aiton, a contractor who had some business on the Suez Canal. According to Piazzi Smyth, he had some theories on the pyramid himself, and so he dispatched one of his engineers, a Mr. Inglis, and some men to excavate. This would lead to all four corner sockets being uncovered, which Piazzi Smyth would record and photograph. The discovery of the corner sockets alone would not be sufficient to calculate the base length, as other factors would have to be taken into account, and this puzzle would finally fall to Petrie some 15 years later. The corner sockets were described as in good condition, the chisel marks of the builders were still evident, and the floors of the sockets were noted as being perfectly level, though the sockets were somewhat irregular in shape. In the above images, we can see the pyramid's northern corner sockets. The socket with the fallen stone resting on its floor is the northwest socket. Today, these sockets are much eroded away, thanks to the tourist traffic. Piazzi Smyth would assume that the corner casing stones would fit inside these sockets, and given the huge amount of debris cloaking the pyramid, it would seem a fair assumption, given the limits that he could achieve during his stay. Distances between the sockets varied between sources, some larger and some smaller than his theoretical 9,140 inches, but he was under the impression that if it could be accurately measured it would agree to his theory. In Piazzi Smyth's image of the northern entrance, we can see the extent of the debris around the entrance, and at his time the debris was at the level of the forced tunnel by which tourists enter the pyramid today. The surviving casing stones on the pavement discovered by Howard Vyse below this spot were covered over by him to protect them, and Piazzi Smyth could not uncover them. In this modern image, we can see the surviving casing stones sitting on the pyramid platform. Petrie was somewhat lucky in his excavations, for on arrival some contractor had removed the casing chips from the north face for road repairs, and exposed Vyse's casing stones along with the pavement. Moreover, years earlier, locals had significantly reduced the amount of debris around the pyramid in order to obtain building material for their villages. This would greatly help Petrie and allowed him to sink numerous shafts throughout the remaining debris on all four sides in an attempt to find further casing or pavement. Further pits and trenches were dug to find the outer edge of the pavement. In short, Petrie tells us that some 85 shafts, pits, or trenches were excavated around the Great Pyramid. The data obtained from these numerous excavations would allow Petrie to finally solve the base size of the pyramid. He states, since the time of the first discovery of some of the sockets in 1801, it has always been supposed that they define the original extent of the pyramid, and various observers have measured from corner to corner of them, and thereby obtained a dimension which was, without further inquiry, put down as the length of the base of the pyramid. But, inasmuch as the sockets are on different levels, it was assumed that the faces of the stones placed in them rose up vertically from the edge of the bottom until they reached the pavement, whatever level that might be, from which the sloping face started upwards. Hence it was concluded that the distances of the socket corners were equal to the lengths of the pyramid sides upon the pavement. On obtaining accurate measures, however, of the relations of the sockets to the casing on each side, it was found that the sockets lay 2 or 3 feet outside the line of the casing of the pyramid on the pavement, and also that the mean planes of the core masonry of the pyramid were far more nearly a true square than the square of the sockets, the socket distances varying on an average 4.4 inches from the mean, and the core sides varying but 1 inch from their mean length, while there was also a similar superiority in the squareness of the core. This first threw doubt on the sockets representing the original base, and on comparing their distances from the center of the pyramid, it was seen that the deeper the level of the socket, the farther out it is from the center. This shows then that the sockets were the limit of the casing where it ran down to the socket floors on a slope, and not where it met the pavement, which was 23 to 40 inches above them. A further test of this result is by seeing whether a line which starts from one socket diagonal and passes alternately through the points of the casing on the sides and the diagonals of the other sockets all around the pyramid will come back again onto the starting point or no, for there is no necessity that it should if it was not so planned in the construction. This line, representing the original edge of the base, does thus return to even 1/10 inch, or far closer than the points could be measured. And hence we have every assurance that this is the true restoration of the original outline of the pyramid base on the pavement. We may never know the exact solution for the corner casing stone, and I have extensive surveying of the size of the pyramid base at pavement level would give a mean value of 9,068.8 inches, significantly less than the 9,140 inches required by the pyramidologists. Moreover, even the socket size given by Petrie would fall short of the desired 9,140 inches, with the longest socket side given as 9,130.8 inches and the shortest socket side given as 9,119.2 inches. From Petrie's Plate 7, we can see his reconstruction of how he thought the corner casing and paving may have looked. Petrie's amended Petrie's corner socket drawing to show another possible solution, of which I can think of a few. In this solution, the casing stone does not actually contact the socket floor. Instead, a large paving slab is fitted instead, and on its upper surface a recess is left in which a protruding square of rock left on the underside of the casing stone would engage. Such a solution would neatly anchor the cornerstone. Concerns on the fastening of cornerstones seem apparent from the small pyramid GIA next to Menkaur's pyramid. Here we appear to have casing cornerstone with a neat protrusion left on its underside, and its possible further stones along the Aris line were similarly adapted. MNR were of the opinion that the corner sockets did not serve for anchoring the pyramid corner edges in the rock. In the above image taken by Petrie, we can see the tourist entrance at top left, often referred to as Al-Mamun's tunnel, and one of the casing stones at bottom right, with writing along its side, which was done by Vyse. The above close-up image shows the casing stone more clearly. The date of its excavation by Vyse has been broken off. This casing stone still survives today. Petrie would comment on the fine joints of these casing stones, some of which he calculated weighed as much as 16 tons. The above image was taken by the Edgar brothers in 1909. Though they were pyramidologists, they did much useful work. Here they have outlined the joints of the casing stones in charcoal. The stone next to the figure is the one shown on Petrie's image above. Note also the large fissure in the foreground under the pavement, noted on Paring's drawing on page 4. The Edgars provided some of the best early photography of the pyramid, and their permission to explore the Great Pyramid was authorized by the then Director General of Antiquities in Egypt, Maspero. Morton Edgar would state, "I have permission to photograph in the interior of the pyramid by flashlight and to take photographic pictures generally. I have also full powers to proceed without delay in the work of clearing out the debris from the descending passage of the Great Pyramid and other work of a like nature. The descending passage appears to have been filled with debris with a regular monotony. Though Vyse had cleared the passage in 1837, it was largely filled again by the time Piazzi Smyth arrived in 1865. The following exchange between Piazzi Smyth and Ali Dabri offers the reason why the passage was blocked below the junction of the descending and ascending passage. "Yes, I see it is," was the reply, "if you mean the way up to the first ascending passage, for that is Caliph al-Mu'min's hole, and just where it should be. But stop here for a moment, if you please, O Ali, who knowest more than any other pyramid guide, and explain what is the meaning of this great bank of sand, blocking up so cruelly all the lower part of the entrance passage beyond this point which we have reached, and preventing any access to this subterranean chamber." Why returned he with a faint smile, and having seated himself despairingly in the oriental manner, it just means what you say, precisely that and nothing more, for no one can go beyond the sand. But if they want to see the king's chamber and sarcophagus, and everything else that all the travelers come to visit, they must turn off here into Al Mamun's hole, and so go up just as I told you to. Pray, though, we asked, who first brought the sand into the passage? But Ali was not well pleased with this question, and tried to parry it by asking argumentatively how the travelers could ever get through the pyramid quick enough if they had to go down the long subterranean passage. In addition to visiting the upper galleries and the chambers there, they had not the strength enough for it too, he said, and so it was for the travelers' own good that the Arabs were obliged to stop up the passage completely, and show there was no hollow space beyond that, for if anything at all of a hole were left visibly open, the travelers were so troublesome in asking where that hole led to, and then insisting on being taken there. What length of time, we asked, has the sandbank been in this place? Oh, a great many years, answered he, more than he could recollect, and then he became absorbed in philosophically examining the state of each and every one of his toes, in a sort of earnest and kindly manner too, as if they had been so many fingers on which he was about to draw kid gloves. And has no tourist, during all that time ever seen, or asked by name to be shown the subterranean chamber at the bottom of this entrance passage? We persisted in inquiring. But how are the travelers to know that any chamber is there? If they don't see it, urged he, and if they don't know there is such a thing, how can they have any desire to see it? Once on a time, perhaps there used to be travelers who knew all about the pyramid, but, muttered he, ruefully shaking his head, and bringing the examination of his toes to an abrupt conclusion, there's a great change come over all the travelers in late years. Formerly, whenever they visited the pyramids, they would stay several days and be a long time looking carefully at every tomb, and they would talk with us Arabs about our houses and our fields, and ask us how we were getting on, and seemed to think they would like to be pyramid Arabs too. But now the travelers are always in such a hurry, and they are getting more and more in a hurry every year. One of the Arabs looking out now at the village has only just time to cry out that travelers are coming, and immediately the pyramid sheiks and all the guides run to the hill. But before they can get there, the travelers are upon them, for they make their poor donkeys gallop through the sand, and the moment they arrive at the pyramid, they call out for their luncheon, never waiting for the corks to be drawn out of the bottles, but knocking their necks off on the stones and letting the pieces fall all about, and then they tell the sheik, now look sharp, old fellow, and get us 3 Arabs apiece to take us up to the top of the pyramid that we may see the view, and be down quicker than anyone else, and we'll time you by our watches. And they no sooner come down than they are on their donkeys again, and away they go over the plain to Masr, and we never see them a second time. Only a very few too of all those travelers ever go inside the pyramid, and as they don't pay any more than their friends who merely went up the outside, the poor Arabs can't afford to let them know that there are many chambers or passages. It won't do at all to let travelers stop too long inside the pyramid. Outside it might be well enough if they liked it, but inside they are burning our candles all the time, and Arabs can't find wax candles by digging any day in the tombs. Well, that will do, Ali, for the present. Said we, as to the stopping up, have the goodness to lead on now to the upper passages. Ali Dabri was certainly a remarkable character, and would experience a lot on the Giza plateau. Indeed, Petrie reports, I was happy in having Ali Gabri, the faithful servant of Professor Smith, Mr. Dixon, and Mr. Gill. His knowledge of all that has been done at Gizeh during his lifetime is invaluable, and his recollections begin with working at 4 years old as a tiny basket carrier for Howard Vyse in 1837. According to Edgar, Ali Dabri died in 1904, though the Edgars would employ his son Haji Ali Gabri during their work at the pyramid. I want to express my greatest gratitude to Keith Hamilton, the man who created this magnificent guide I used to create this video. Keith made huge job to collect all information regarding the Great Pyramid, to analyze it, and to unite all possible data together. As a result, we have clear and full picture of the Great Pyramid. Thank you very much, Keith. Also, I want to say thanks to other authors and researchers who provided pictures and information to make this video possible. So, here guys, I have to interrupt my story, and you can watch more about the Great Pyramid in my next videos. The Great Pyramid is the most famous object of ancient Egypt, and I can talk about it for hours. So watch my other videos, subscribe my YouTube channel, and give me some likes and comments. I hope you loved my story. Thank you guys very much. Love you all.